Okay, hello everybody and welcome to our Business English webinar today. My name's Paul, I'm a teacher on italki and I'm here today to do a little bit of business English with some nice interesting phrases and some nice interesting vocabulary for you here today. Okay, so I'll start with the most important thing maybe. I'll introduce myself just a little bit, tell you a little bit about me as a teacher and a little bit about my background and why maybe I think I'm a good person to talk to you about business English. Okay, so as I said, my name's Paul. I'm from a city called Sheffield, which is in the north of England in the UK, and I've been an English teacher for about 13 years now. Most recently, I've been teaching on italki for about the past 7 or 8 months, and I find it absolutely fascinating. It's a really great way to meet new students and to teach people from all over the world. Right now, I teach students from China, Russia, Brazil, Poland, Spain. It's a really interesting way for students to learn English and for me to meet interesting people from around the globe. Okay. Before that, I taught for a long time in lots of different countries. I started way back in 2004 when I taught in Korea, and since then I've worked in countries such as China, the UAE, France, and most recently Germany. Let me tell you a little bit about my business English background. I actually started teaching business English again quite a long time ago in 2006 in China. I was based in a city called Tianjin in the north of China, where I taught a lot of major companies doing lots of different business functions like English for emails, English for presentation, communication skills in English, all kind of things like that. I also taught around China in cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. I really enjoyed it. I taught lots of students, lots of different business functions and lots of different factors for business English. All around the world, I've done different business English functions in France, in UAE, and most recently I was working for a major multinational company in Germany, and I was teaching their staff lots of different business English things. I did lots of stuff on finance English, HR English, and a lot of technical English like that. Okay, that's why I think I'm the right person today to talk to you a little bit about business English. Um, what I'd like to say first before we jump in is that I'd very much like this to be an interactive type of webinar. So if you do have any comments, if I ask a question and you think you know the answer or you'd like to add something, please feel free to write into the comments on Facebook and I'll try to answer them. I'll try to deal with them as we go in the class. If you do have any big major questions that might take more than 5 or 10 seconds for me to answer, that's great. Please hold those and I'll answer those at the end of the class. I'm setting aside 3 or 4 minutes where I will answer any slightly more complicated questions. Okay, right. I hope that's a good introduction and I hope you're ready to jump in with some business English. So let's go. Right, let me tell you a little bit about what we are going to look at today. We're going to look at two functions of business English. The first of these is English for meetings, and the second is HR English. Now, let me ask a bit of a rhetorical question. Why have I picked these two subjects? Well, firstly, I picked English for meetings because it's a really, really common one, and anybody who has to use English at work will probably have to use it in a meeting at some point. Meetings are very, very common scenarios for everybody. So we're going to look at some very, very basic meeting vocabulary, some interesting words, a couple of interesting phrases that we can use in there. And we're also going to look at what we call meeting collocations. Anybody know what a collocation is? Right, well, a collocation, quite simply, is when you put two words together. So, for example, I'm wearing a watch today. So it's very common you would say to look at your watch, to put on your watch, to take off your watch. These we might call them a word pair, where different phrases or different words will go together a lot. Okay, and we're going to look at some words that are used with meetings, used in meetings, and we'll see what kind of verbs and nouns we can pair together and what kind of interesting phrases we can make. I hope it'll be nice and useful for you. The second one will be English for HR. Now, this one's a bit more complicated, but I also think it's a great one for us to stimulate a little bit of discussion and to have some nice, interesting examples. Okay, so in both English for meetings and in English for HR, I have some vocabulary type slides where we'll talk about words and we'll talk about their meanings. Equally, in HR English, we're also going to talk a little bit about how we can use them, how we can employ them, and I've got some interesting examples that we can put together. Okay, well, I hope they're interesting subjects for you, and I hope you're ready to learn about them. As I said, if you have any quick questions or if you have any little comments, please feel free to write them on Facebook, and I'll happily answer them. I'll happily take a look. If you do have big questions, if you want me to explain something in a little more detail, please let me know, and I'll happily do that at the end of the class. Okay? All right, so let's get ready. We're going to start with a little bit of a warm-up activity. And in that activity, we are going to look at a few different words, a few different phrases that are particularly useful in business English and which are nice and fun to use. Okay, so we've got 4 of them here. We've got elephant in the room, bottom line, in the loop, and viral marketing. Okay, so if you know any of these, or if you think you know them, please feel free to make a comment, to add something on Facebook, and I'll happily see if that's correct. Whilst I give you a little bit of time to think about that, let me give you a couple of little clues. Okay, so the elephant in the room is a phrase that we often use, particularly in meetings or particularly in a situation where we're communicating with our colleagues, and it's often about something big. You don't use it for something small. So that's a nice clue for elephant in the room. Bottom line can often be a very practical, and it can often be a very financial kind of word. It actually has 2 meanings that we can look at. In the loop is to do with communications, and viral marketing, as it might suggest, is to do with marketing and sales and various things. So, does anybody have any comments? Can anybody give me any answers? Can anybody give me any explanations for those? Anybody? All right, I don't see many coming through. So what I shall do, I shall explain a few of them myself. Okay. So first of all, let's talk about elephants in the room. Now, an elephant in the room is a phrase that we use to describe when there is something big that we need to talk about. It's often a problem, it's often a difficult situation, it's often something that's very tricky. Okay? So, for example, if we know that somebody has made a big mistake and we need to fix the problem that it's created, we need to fix that situation, you would often describe this as being the elephant in the room. Before we address it, before we actually fix that problem, we might say in a meeting, all right, so we have the elephant in the room. Tom or Mike made a big mistake. We really need to fix it. Yeah. I can give you quite a fun example, actually. This happened to me in China once, and I was the elephant in the room. I'd been playing football the day before a big meeting, and I went to head the football, and I hit somebody on the side of their head, and I broke my nose, so that meant that my nose was looking a bit funny, and my eye was all purple. So it looked really bad. It didn't look very good at all. The next day I had a big meeting to talk about teaching business English with a company in Tianjin. I went into the meeting. There were about 6 or 7 of us, and everybody in the meeting was just staring at me. So I said, okay guys, elephant in the room. Yes, my face doesn't look very good. I broke my nose playing football yesterday. I haven't been fighting. I haven't been doing anything crazy. So that would be a good example of the elephant in the room. We'll move next on to the bottom line. Now, bottom line comes particularly from finance. Now, it actually comes, the clear direct meaning is to talk about profit and loss. So your bottom line essentially is how much money you make after all your costs are taken into consideration, and all your revenues or your incomes are taken into consideration. What's left, it can be described as your bottom line. That can be a profit, it can also be a loss if you're not doing very well. The reason we call it the bottom line is that it used to be when we have an Excel sheet or when we have a printed balance sheet, it's usually at the very bottom of that sheet. The number saying whether we've made money or whether we've lost money. So we describe the key financial outcome, whether it's a profit, whether it's a loss, as the bottom line. So you can say our bottom line was a profit of $50 million, or our bottom line was a loss of $100,000. Yeah. We can also use it in a slightly more indirect way to talk about things that are very important, not less, sorry, very important. And we don't actually mean money, but we mean things that you can't really deal without, things that are very important to the core of a company. So you might use it, you often use it at the start of a sentence when you want to show that something is really important, that you cannot change it, or maybe you have to move it, or it really needs fixing. So you would say, bottom line, we need to improve our marketing. Or bottom line, we need to fix this problem. That means it's the key thing, it's the most important thing we have to look at. Okay, so as I said before, in the loop is to do with communications. And basically, it's a relatively simple one. It means whether you are involved in the communication that's going on with your company or whether you are not involved. So you've got in the loop. You've also got the opposite to that, which is out of the loop. So a really easy example is if you go on vacation or if you are sick, you come back to the office, you've missed a week, you've missed 2 weeks of work, and there's lots of stuff that's happened that you don't know about. So you might say, I didn't know we were doing this. I am out of the loop. Yeah. You might also say, if you go into your first meeting or your first conference call after you've been away, you might say, can you bring me back into the loop? Okay. So basically it means you're involved in communication and you know what's happening. Okay. I hope that's nice and clear. I hope that makes sense. So we're going to look next at viral marketing. Now, viral marketing actually sounds quite bad, doesn't it? Because the word viral comes from the word virus. And when you think of virus, you think usually of one of two things. First of all, you think of a computer virus that can cause you all kinds of damage on your computer. You think about hackers and your computer being frozen with things like ransomware and all stuff like that. You also think about something that can make people sick and can kill people. So a virus is a disease that will spread very quickly around people. Okay, so neither of those things sound particularly nice, do they? However, viral marketing we tend to use in a very, very positive way, which sounds a little bit crazy, doesn't it? It's not to do with the negative element, it's not to do with the destruction of a computer virus, and it's not to do with the sickness of a regular virus. It's all to do with the idea of it spreading. So a normal virus spreads between people and makes them sick. Viral marketing is the idea that a product or an idea will spread between people and they will follow that idea. They will follow that product. And because of this, the product will get more popular. The product will gain momentum in the market. We often use it when we talk about things like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. When a product becomes very popular on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, lots of people get access to it. Lots of people get to see it very, very quickly. And we often use the phrase to go viral. So if a product or a person or even a video on YouTube, for example, becomes really popular and everybody's suddenly watching it, you could say, wow, this is going really well. It has gone viral. Okay, and that's what we mean by viral marketing. Okay, that's our warmer. They're all our idioms. I hope at some point in the next few days you might be able to use those at work. If you're in sales and marketing, you can say, we really hope our product goes viral. If you're in any job whatsoever and you've been away or you feel you don't quite know what's going on, you can say, oh guys, I think I'm out of the loop. Can you bring me back into the loop? If you're in finance, using bottom line is a really useful one when we're talking about profit and loss. And in any kind of area, the elephant in the room is a great phrase to talk about, oh, there's something big we need to discuss. There's a problem we need to solve. Okay, right. No comments as yet, anybody. If you do have any, please feel free to type them onto Facebook, and I'm really keen to look at them. I'm really keen to see them. But let's move on now to our first big area of the day, and that first big area is to talk about meetings. Okay, now what we've got on this slide is we've got 9 interesting pieces of vocabulary that we can use for meetings, and those are written in yellow on the left of the screen. So we've got agenda, clarification, comment, consensus, implement or implementation, there's 2 there, 2 for the price of 1 maybe, minutes, objectives, participant, and wrap up. So there's 9 pieces of vocabulary there, and on the right of the slide we've got 9 explanations. These are written in a nice pinky red kind of color. Okay, so our objective today is we're going to try to mix and match. So for example, agenda, one of the words on the list matches to agenda, not the one opposite, one of the different ones. So those of you who are watching, can anybody tell me what agenda means? Can anybody write it in the comments? If you think you know the meaning of any of the words, please feel free to write them in the comments and I'll happily tell you if you're correct or not. Okay. Anybody? So agenda, let me give you a little bit of a clue. Agenda is something that we usually have for most meetings. It's a good type of organization. It's a good type of preparation for a meeting. It can either be an email or it can be a hard copy. It can be a piece of paper. Does anybody have any ideas? Anybody have any options that they think it could be? Okay, dogs. Well, I'm not getting any comments, so what I'll do is I'll start giving you some explanations, and if you think you know the answer to some of the others, you can jump in and you can give me some comments and I'll see if you're correct. Okay. Okay, so an agenda is basically, it's the one near the bottom. It says a list of objectives to cover in a meeting. So the agenda will list the things in the meeting that you need to discuss. Okay, now often an agenda can be prepared as an email that's sent to people before the meeting, or it can be a hard copy that you have once you sit down in the meeting. You can pick it up, you can look at it. It might also even be put on a PowerPoint presentation at the start of the meeting if it is a big formal meeting. Okay, so our next one is another of the words that can be 2 for the price of 1. We have clarification, which is a noun. And we can also have clarify, which was a verb. Okay, so clarification, the noun, and clarify, the verb. So what does it mean? So basically, it's nice and simple. It means to make something clear. So it's the type of thing when you're going to explain something to other people in the meeting. So for example, you might say, can you clarify this point? Can you clarify what you mean? You might ask somebody to give you or to offer you clarification. Okay. Now clarify is one of the words we are going to look at with collocations in a few minutes, because it is a nice interesting one and it can collocate, it can link to a lot of other words. Okay. The next one is a relatively simple one. It can be both a verb, to comment, and it can be a noun as well, to make a comment. Okay. So what does it mean? Comment. Anybody? Well, basically what it means is to give your ideas or opinions on a subject. So if somebody makes a suggestion in a meeting, if somebody makes a proposal and they want to know what everybody else thinks, they can ask people for their comments. Okay? Nice easy way to look at it, nice easy way to think about the explanation is, if we think about Facebook, you have underneath, you have the little box where you can comment. Yeah, so that's when you say what you think, you give your ideas, you even ask a question. Okay, so a nice easy way to look at that one. Yeah. Okay, the next one, slightly trickier one, consensus. Now, consensus is something that we often hope to achieve in most meetings. Now, basically, it means that we are all agreeing on something. Now, the explanation I've written on the slide is a nice simple one to reach an agreement. However, I like to expand on it a little bit sometimes. Consensus generally means when everybody agrees. It's not just necessarily two people, it can often be a group of 5 or 10 people, and it's where we all share the same idea, we all share the same opinion, and we agree on something. Now, I like to think we can use popular politics and the world affairs today to explain consensus, because unfortunately, we don't have too much consensus in the world today. I'm going to use my country, the UK, and I'm going to use America, the US, as two great examples of where we haven't seen too much consensus. So, for example, just over a year ago in the UK, we voted to leave the European Union. This wasn't something that everybody agreed upon. About 50% of the country voted yes to leave, and about 49% of the country voted to stay. So there wasn't much agreement. There was a lot of division. Yeah? Consensus would be if everybody wanted to leave or if everybody wanted to stay. The same thing is true in America. They had the election campaign with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. There was no great consensus. The country was split. Lots of people were for Hillary, lots of people were for Donald Trump, and you had a clear division in the country. There wasn't an overall understanding, there wasn't an overall agreement. So consensus is where everybody's on the same page. Everybody tends to agree. Okay. Sadly, we're not seeing too much of it in the world today at the moment. Okay, now let's move to our next one, which is implement or implementation. The short one, implement, is the verb, and implementation is the noun. We tend to use it more as a verb, but you can use both. What does this mean? Well, very simply, this means to put an idea into practice. So that means if you think something is fantastic and you think it will help your company, implementation is taking that idea that you think will help and actually doing it and making sure that the company will be successful. Okay, so basically it translates to having a real clear and practical impact on your company. Okay, now the next one's a really simple one. Implementation and consensus are quite tricky ones when you think about it. Minutes is quite simple. Now, when I ask this in my italki classes, or when I've asked in real life classes where I'm face to face with students, I ask what does minutes mean, and everybody looks at their watch. They all think 60 minutes is an hour, or I will just go for a break for 10 minutes. But minutes here means something completely different. Minutes here basically means notes that are taken in a meeting. So if you have a nice big meeting, 10, 15, 20 people sat around a table or sat around a conference room, there's often going to be one person, often a secretary or a PA or an administrative assistant, who will be typing away on their laptop, or might even, if we're a bit old-fashioned, still be writing it down with a pen and paper, taking notes on what happens. They'll write down what one person said, what someone else said. And then after the meeting, they can email, they can photocopy that information and distribute it to everybody. So that is notes taken in the meeting, and that is minutes. Okie dokes. Let's look at the next one, which is again a very practical one, but quite a simple one. Objectives. Now, we've used the word objectives already for things that we see on our agenda, but what is an objective? That's a good question, isn't it? Basically, objectives are the things we hope to achieve, the things we hope to do in the meeting. So often in a meeting, you'll be there to discuss a situation and ultimately choose a conclusion or to choose a course of action. So your objective would be to find that to reach that conclusion, to find that course of action, to finish something. Okay, so that would be our objectives. Okay, the next one is a really simple one, nice and easy, and that is a participant. Okay. Now it can also be a noun, it can also be a verb. So you're getting 3 words for the price of 1 here. So first of all, participant is a person, or if it's plural, participants, the people who take part in a meeting. So if you've got a big meeting, like a national conference or something, you can say, oh wow, we've got over 100 participants in our meeting today. If it's a lot smaller, like a department meeting, you might say, oh, we've got 10 participants in our meeting today. Okay? But we can use it as a verb, which is to participate. You can change your sentence round and you can say there will be 100 people participating in this meeting. Or if it's a department meeting, you can say 5 of us or 10 of us will participate in this meeting. Okay. You can also use it as a noun, which is participation. So you can say, we hope to see lots of participation in the meeting. That means I want to have lots of people coming. I want to have lots of people involved. Okay, so you've got participate, participants, now that's the person, and participation. Okay, so we've got 3 words for the price of 1 there. Bargain, yes? Okay, so let's look at the next one, which is wrap up. Now, wrap up is a nice simple one, and wrap up is a word I might use in about 25 minutes when our class comes to a close. Yeah, and wrap up basically means to end a meeting. So you can say, okay, we're done for today, let's wrap things up. Now, wrap up is a phrasal verb, so we can cut it in half. So you can say wrap the meeting up. You can say wrap today's meeting up. I might say, okay, let's wrap today's class up, but not yet, in a few minutes. Yeah. You can also put the words at the end, so you can say, let's wrap up the meeting, and I can say, let's wrap up this webinar. Okay, and I'll give you a clue. I probably will say that in 25 minutes or so. Okay, so that is vocabulary for meetings. Again, if you have questions, if you have comments, please feel free to comment on Facebook. If you have comments, as we looked at earlier, I'd be really happy to see them. I'd be really happy to answer any questions. Okay, so now we are going to look at the second part of our meetings vocabulary, and we're going to look at the idea of collocations. Now, as I mentioned before, collocations is where we put 2 words together. Okay, I'll give you a couple of really easy examples. I'll take my drink here. So this is a glass of juice. So with juice, there are lots of words that you don't use with it. You don't read juice, you don't listen juice, you don't dance juice, but you would drink juice. When you put it into the glass, you would pour juice. When you go to the supermarket, you would buy juice. And this idea, words that go together very often, words that go together commonly, is called a collocation. Okay. Now, one of the things I often hear from many students is an overuse of words like do and make. Okay. Now, they are great words and we use them a lot in English, but there are also situations where we probably don't need to use them and we can use other words. So what we're going to look at here is the specific words that we can use for each of these parts of the meeting. So consensus. Now, consensus, as we talked about, means everybody agreeing, everybody being on the same page. Okay. Now, there are 2 or 3 words that you need to look at when you're in the meeting, and consensus is your objective. Okay. Now, a really common one would be reach. So the chairman of the meeting or the chairperson of the meeting might ask at the start, they may say at the start, our objective is to reach a consensus on this subject, or to reach a consensus on this proposal, for example. So reach a consensus means that you're bringing everybody together. If you're being very positive with your language, you might also say to achieve a consensus. Yeah. You might also, and this is a slightly more political one, but it would also work, you might look at creating a consensus. Okay? They're all 3 positive ones. To reach, to achieve, and to create are all good. If you're talking about failure, If you talk about Brexit and Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, we haven't managed to get consensus. So you can be negative and you say we haven't reached a consensus or we didn't reach a consensus. You can also say to break a consensus or to destroy a consensus. The last year in politics has been a good example of destroying consensus. Yep. Okay, right. Clarification, which we can also use as a verb as clarify. Okay, so I want to look at this from two perspectives, from two different angles. The first one, I am a person in the meeting and I don't understand or I don't really get what the other person means. So I want more information. I want the other person to make it clearer for me. So the first thing I can do is ask for clarification. Yeah. So you can say, can I ask for clarification? Or can I ask you to clarify that point? Now, ask is the most common word when we are the person who doesn't understand. You can also maybe request, but that's a very, very formal one. You might do that in a very important meeting, but you wouldn't really do it with your everyday colleagues. When you're dealing with your everyday colleagues, you would ask for clarification. When I'm on the other side of the meeting, when it's me who is speaking and somebody else doesn't understand, in this scenario, I've got a lot more options. I can. The easiest and the most common is to give clarification. Okay. You might also offer clarification. You might also provide clarification. So give, offer, and provide are really good ways of using clarification. You can also just say clarify. Yep. But if you're wanting to have a little bit more color in your language, let me offer some clarification. Let me provide you some clarification will be two great ways of looking good in a meeting and of offering some nice colorful English. Okay, let's move on to agenda. Now, an agenda is often something we use to keep control of a meeting. So if you have a list of objectives that you know you want to achieve, if you're talking about those objectives, the meeting has a good chance of being successful. You have a good chance of finding a solution. If you talk about something else, then your meeting has far less chance of being successful and it has far less chance of reaching its objectives. So we're going to look at two types of words. Words that are very positive when our agenda and our objectives and our discussion are running parallel, and words that are slightly less positive when our agenda, objectives, discussion are maybe going off on a tangent, are not quite fitting where they should be. Okay, so if we're staying positive, you would say that we are keeping to an agenda. You might also say we are following an agenda, or we are staying on agenda. So keeping, staying, and following. Staying on the agenda, keeping to the agenda, and simply following the agenda are really good collocations. So if you're in control of a meeting and you want to make sure that the meeting stays positive, you're very likely to say, okay guys, let's keep to the agenda. Okay guys, please, let's follow the agenda. Or guys, let's stay on the agenda. Okay? Let's go negative. Negative, you might say, very simply, off the agenda. Yeah. Now that's a very simple one. You can say, guys, we are off the agenda. Yeah. Let's get back onto the agenda. Yeah. Which is a nice and simple one. If you want to be a little bit more complicated, if you want to say it in a slightly more colorful way, you might say we've left the agenda. Okay. We are leaving the agenda. We've left the agenda. You might also say, and this is a good one for business travel as well, we've departed from the agenda. So if you say, guys, look, the meeting's not going so well here, we've left the agenda. We've departed from the agenda. And that basically says we're not talking about what we should be talking about. Okay. Right, and our last one, objectives. This one, like talk about goals and targets and ambitions and things. I like this because it's a really positive very optimistic type of language. And the collocations I'm going to give you are very positive. They are very optimistic. So we would say things for objectives like you would reach your objectives, you would hit your objectives, and you would achieve your objectives. They're three really good collocations. So reach, hit, achieve. I talked earlier about not just using make and do. You can also sometimes use make your objectives. But I think reach an objective, hit an objective, also maybe even complete an objective, and of course achieve an objective are really good phrases to use. Okay, so you can say at the end of a really successful meeting, guys, everybody, thank you very much. We've managed to achieve our objectives for this meeting. It's been very successful. Or you could say something along the lines of, oh yeah, we've reached our objectives. That's great. We can move on. All right, super. Okay, everybody. So I'll come back to put myself nice and big. That's the end of our conversations regarding meetings. Okay, I hope you found the vocabulary really useful. I hope it's something that you can take into your jobs tomorrow or later on in the week and use. If you're in a meeting and it kind of goes off track a little bit, you can say, hey everybody, let's follow the agenda. Let's keep to the agenda so we can achieve or create a consensus and reach our objectives. What a lovely phrase that would be, yeah? I would like to hear that in a meeting. Okie doke, so our next area to talk about will be HR. Now, let me explain a little bit why I decided to choose this one. First of all, it's an area that I've taught a lot. I did a lot of work, for example, with the government in the United Arab Emirates, dealing with their Ministry of Labour. So there were lots of employment and HR issues in those courses. I actually wrote a book about it called Employment and HR English, which is a really interesting book if you're not studying English. I like it a lot. I find it very interesting. I also think it's useful because, well, getting a job, staying in a job, getting paid, all things like this, sure, they're to do with HR managers, but everybody needs to get paid. Everybody needs to find a job. Everybody needs to keep a job. And everybody at some point gets sick or goes on holiday. So a little bit of HR vocabulary is useful for everyone. Okay? So I think this one is a little bit more complicated and a little bit more colorful than the meetings language. Okay? So I hope you're ready. Let's go and take a look at some of the new ones. So I decided I like to be very positive in my classes, but for this one, I decided to start nice and negative, unfortunately. So we're going to start with the word dismiss, which is a verb, or the noun dismissal. Okay? Now, what does this mean? It's really not a positive word. It's a very negative word. Maybe the most negative word you can have when it comes to HR. Now, this one basically means when an employee leaves. So it's further down the page. It says when the company decides to remove an employee, often for negative reasons. So for example, if somebody's not doing their job very well, if somebody has done something in their job that's maybe illegal, if they've done something in the workplace that's not very nice and the company says, okay, you can't work here anymore, that's not professional, they will dismiss that employee. Okay? We're going to have lots of different examples of it. There are lots of antonyms and synonyms for this one, particularly some really good synonyms that can get quite aggressive and quite negative. We'll talk about those on the next slide. Okay? Oh, that was a negative start to the slide, wasn't it? We'll go and be a lot more positive on the next one. And I'm going to look at the word engage and engagement. Okay? Now this one, dismissal, talks about when a company is really not happy with an employee. Engagement talks about when an employee is very happy with a company. So engagement is how motivated an employee feels and how close he or she feels to a company. So for example, if you really love your job, you feel a great connection to that company, you can say, oh, I have a high level of engagement. I feel very engaged with my company. Basically, it means when you wake up in the morning, do you want to go to work? Do you like that company? Do you want to be there? If you don't like it, if you hate going to your job and you think, oh no, I just can't get out of bed, you can say, I don't feel very engaged. My level of engagement is very, very low. Okay, so engagement, how motivated you are, how much you enjoy your work. We also use it in teaching. If students are enjoying a class, if they're focused, if they're motivated to learn, you can say, oh, wow, this student is very engaged, which is an adjective to describe the situation. Or you could say, this class is very engaging, which is another adjective. Engage describes the student, engaging describes the teacher. Engagement, you could say, oh, there's a high level of engagement in this class. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is leave, which is one of my favorites. Now, this one doesn't mean just to go out the door, although it's kind of similar. Basically, leave means when an employee is not at work. Now, this can be for many different reasons, and I won't explain those reasons now. And that's because we'll talk about them on the next slide. Okay? So it basically means when you are not at work, and that can be for a variety of different reasons. Okay? And as I said, we'll explain it on the very next slide. Okay? So we'll move to talk about recruit and recruitment. Now, recruit is the verb, recruitment is the noun. What does this mean? This basically means when a company is hiring somebody, when they are bringing people, this is the bottom one of our vocab list, it means when they're bringing people into the company. So if a company desperately needs a new finance manager, the HR manager, the general manager would say, okay guys, we really need to recruit a new person. If a company is expanding, it's getting a lot bigger and it needs a lot more people, you can say, okay guys, we need to have a high level of recruitment. We need to do a lot of recruitment. Okie dokes, bringing people into the company, which is quite a positive one. The next one, we're going back to negativity and we're going to talk about redundancy. Now, redundancy and dismissal are kind of similar because it means people going out of the company. Now, redundancy means when a company cuts jobs, but there is a difference to dismissal. Dismissal is when the employee usually does something bad and the company has a good reason to remove them. Redundancy, or to make an employee redundant, means that the employee has done nothing wrong and the company needs to remove them, often for financial reasons or practical reasons. Now, I realize that's quite a long description. Let me give you an easier one. In 2008, during the financial crisis, a lot of companies no longer had enough money to pay their whole workforce. Yeah? So they had to get rid of people. They had to remove people from the company. Now, this wasn't the employees' fault. The employees had done nothing wrong. So they weren't dismissed. Instead, they were made redundant because the company couldn't afford to pay for them. And that's the key difference. Dismissed is usually the employee's fault. And redundancy is where the company is either restructuring or no longer has the money to pay for the workers. Okay, so dismissal and redundancy both mean people leaving the company, but for different reasons. You might also add that with redundancy, often the person leaving will be entitled to compensation, will be entitled to some money before they leave the company. If you are dismissed, you're not entitled to that money. Okay, right, I hope that one was nice and clear and you can see the distinction, the difference between the two. Right, let's move on to the next one, which is remuneration, which is a difficult one to say. Remuneration. Often people get this wrong actually and say remuneration, but the correct word is remuneration. What does that mean? It's all to do with this one. It's all to do with money and benefits. Okay, so it's the second one down. Remuneration is the money and benefits paid to an employee. Okay, now we're going to go into that one as well in a lot more detail, but we're going to do that on the next slide. Okay, so dismiss we're going to look at a little bit more. Leave we're going to look at a little bit more, and remuneration we're going to look at a little bit more in just a couple of minutes. Okay? Right. Okay, so we'll move to the next one, which is again about people leaving a company. This one is resign, which is the verb, or resignation, which is the noun. Okay? And that basically means when an employee decides to leave the company themselves. So if you find a new job, if you no longer want to work that company, you would resign. Okay? And we're going for another one next about leaving a company, and this one is retirement. This one, though, is a much nicer word, and this is when an employee stops working at the end of his or her career. They reach 60, 65, maybe a little bit less if you've been very successful, and you say, okay, I'm old enough now to stop work. I will retire. I will enjoy my retirement. Okay, nice and simple, that one. And the last one is also another simple one. It's something we're doing right now here in this webinar, and that is training. And basically this is sessions usually organized by a company, but you can do it yourself like you are right now. And they are designed to help employees improve. So right now we're doing English training, but you can do IT training, you can do presentation skills training, you can do anything to make yourself a better employee and to make yourself function better within a company. Okay, right. That's our vocabulary for HR. I'm very quickly going to move on to our next one, which is where we're going to talk a little bit about the 3 key words from our HR section: dismiss, leave, and remuneration. Okay, so dismiss is a very formal word. It's the kind of word you would see written on a contract, but it's not one that we would use as much in daily conversation. Far more common ones would be fire, which is one you hear a lot. Terminate, which is similar to dismiss in that it's quite formal. It also, to me, sounds quite aggressive. It reminds me of the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm sure you all know that one. And to let go. Let go, you might often use, and a HR manager might often use it as a way of saying it in a slightly nicer way than terminate or dismiss. But basically, all 3 of these mean the same as dismiss. They mean to remove somebody from their position. Terminate is very strong. It's very forceful. It gives you the idea of Arnie coming around shooting people. Fire is also quite aggressive. Let go is maybe a little bit softer. So if you're describing that kind of situation, you could say, yeah, John has left the company. The company thought his performance wasn't good enough. He has been dismissed. He has been fired, he has been terminated, he has been let go. Any of those 4 work very well for that situation, depending on your level of seriousness and maybe about negativity as well. Okay, taking leave, not being at work, something we all love maybe. So, we've got 5 different types of leave to talk about. The first one is a nice simple one, and that is annual leave. A good synonym for this would be your holiday time, or if you're using American English, your vacation time. Okay, so depending on the country you're from and depending on the company, this might be 10 days or it might be 25 or 30 days of holiday that you can take at some point during the year. And we describe that as annual leave. So for example, you might hear the question, where's Paul? Oh, he's not here, he's on annual leave. He'll be back in 3 weeks. The next 2 go together, and that's paternity leave and maternity leave. Maternity is more common than paternity, but they're both very common. They're both very pertinent things nowadays. Basically, maternity leave means when a woman is having a baby and takes time off to have that baby. Paternity leave means when a man's partner has had a baby and he also takes some time off. Usually, as I'm sure you're probably all aware, paternity leave is usually a lot shorter than maternity leave. Okay, but they both mean when somebody is taking time off for a baby. Paternity, it's the dad, and maternity, it's the woman. The mum, sorry. And then we've got compassionate leave, which unfortunately is when something bad happens to you. So if a family member dies, if somebody in your family is very sick and you have to take time to take time off to take care of them, you would call that compassionate leave. So you'd say, oh, we're very sorry to hear that Mike's mother has died. He's taken compassionate leave. Okay. And the last one is a really, really common one. The first and the last are very common ones: annual leave and also sick leave. That's when you are not very well and you're out of the office because you are not feeling very good. So sick leave. Okay. Our last one is remuneration, and I'll run through this a little bit quicker as we're about to run out of time. Remuneration talks a little bit about your salary, your benefits. So the first one is salary, which you get every month. We often have the word wages. Now, you often use wages to talk about money if you're in a job where you're paid only every week. This tends to be people who work with their hands rather than in office jobs. So you can have salary, you can also have wages. Bonus generally tends to be for if your performance has been very good. So if you, for example, if you reach an objective, like we talked about in meetings, you might get a bonus. Okay. Commission tends to work for people in sales and marketing, which is where if they sell it's a type of bonus. It's where if they sell a certain amount of products, they get a percentage of the sales, or they get a certain amount of money based on what they sell. So for example, you see a lot of companies will have salespeople on a commission of 5 or 10% of what they sell. If they do very well, if they sell lots of products, they take home a bigger salary. If they don't do very well, they don't make very much money. Okay, very common in the sales area. And the last one is pension, which is money that is set aside for your retirement. So some companies might offer employees a pension scheme where they will put money into it each month, and if the employee stays with them for a long time, when they retire, they get a very nice little, it's almost like the salary for when you're retired. They get a nice payment each month. Okie dokes, guys. So that is the end of my webinar for today. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you found it informative. And I really hope that around the world, there'll be lots of people using some of the phrases we've talked about in meetings tomorrow, next week, or maybe in situations where you're talking about recruiting, hiring, or just general movement of people within a company. I'll ask if anybody has any questions. We've not had any comments on the Facebook stream that I've seen. Does anyone have any questions, any queries? If you do, please type them in. I'll finish by saying that I really do hope that a lot of you will try and use italki a little bit. I hope you'd like to come and see me, but it certainly doesn't have to be me. There are hundreds of fantastic teachers teaching English and lots of other languages. As I said at the start of the class, it's a really fantastic resource for students to be able to meet teachers from all over the world. And I love it as a teacher because I get to meet people and students from all over the world. Okay, everyone, I very much hope you enjoyed the class. If you do have any comments, if you do have any queries, please leave them, and I'll leave them on the next to the video, and I'll happily answer them later. Or you can find me on italki, send me a message, and ask me any questions there as well. Okay, everyone, thank you very much for your time. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and please use some of my phrases in your meetings and your HR discussions over the next couple of weeks. Okay, thanks everybody. Bye bye. Have a great day.